Crawford beats Canelo. Yes, that's right. Crawford beats Canelo. Now, Terence Crawford showed the world that he is an elite level fighter in every sense. It was a performance of high boxing intelligence. And in simple terms, it was an absolute masterpiece. So let's talk about it. So one of the most important elements of Crawford's victory was the utilization of not only the jab, but also the jab coming from the southpaw position. So from Canelo's perspective, there was an issue right off the bat, because not only do you have to train for an orthodox fighter, you have to also train for a southpaw. However, Crawford, I believe, for the entirety of the fight, stayed in the southpaw stance. But the jab was significant. Of course, the jab is considered the most important punch in boxing. And they say you don't hook with a hooker, but you definitely jab with a jabber. For example, you don't exchange left hooks with Joe Frazier, you don't exchange left hooks with Tommy Morrison, you don't exchange left hooks with Mike Tyson, you don't exchange left hooks with Evander Holyfield, etc. You get the picture. But you do jab with a jabber, similar to when Frank Bruno fought Lennox Lewis. Many would consider Lennox Lewis to have one of the best jabs of all time. But Bruno engaged in the jab battle, and that increased his chances. Eventually, Lennox Lewis won, but that was an essential part of Frank Bruno making the fight competitive. So you jab with a jabber. And here was the problem with Canelo's approach, or maybe part of the problem. He allowed Crawford to dominate with the jab. He absolutely dominated with the jab. And that simply couldn't happen. I felt like Canelo needed to contest with the jab. He needed to bring the jab. He needed to at least, if he couldn't win the battle of the jabs, he at least had to engage in the battle of the jabs. And this is where Crawford just kind of took over, stealing rounds with an effective jab. So as I stated, the jab was important. The battle of the jabs was extremely important. But another element that was important, and we have to give Teddy Atlas a lot of credit for this, is the feet. Who wins the battle of movement? And movement is so important in boxing because it can allow you to get in range and out of range. And obviously, we can see historical examples of this. When we see great movers, you think of, well, who do you think of? You can think of Muhammad Ali. What an amazing mover he was. Sugar Ray Leonard, Floyd Mayweather, Usyk, Roy Jones. Movement is crucial. And like I said, Crawford implemented a strong jab and he implemented movement. So when you're moving and you're moving effectively, you punch when you want to punch. And when you don't want your opponent to punch you, then you move away. And Crawford just implemented this. He implemented this to perfection. And Canelo was unable to, because Canelo had to cut off the ring. He had to invest in the body. But he was unable to do this effectively. Of course, he was trying to do it, but he was unable to do it effectively. So movement was the key, and Crawford utilized the movement effectively, and he utilized the jab effectively. And this moves me to another part of the fight, which potentially would have been crucial. For Canelo to win, yes, he needed to engage in the jab to get in range, but he also needed to implement the body work and be effective on the inside. And he wasn't really that effective in either capacity. Canelo has a great left hook to the body, and he was able to throw the left hook to the body, but every time he threw it, it would hit. It would go against a block. What was quite interesting is that one of the traits of Canelo is to do a feint or a jab and then throw a right uppercut to the head and a left hook to the body. He never did that. The reason why I think he didn't do that is because Crawford didn't enable him to do that. So Crawford nullified. So obviously Canelo was able to go through the front door. He was able to leap in and throw the left hook to the body. but he wasn't able to utilize punch creativity to really, start from the head and then go to the body. So like I said, you could have the jab, right uppercut to the head, left hook to the body, or you could do a short left hook to the head and then a short left hook to the body. But simply, Crawford didn't give him the opportunity to do that. He diffused Canelo's rhythm with the jab. He diffused it with the movement. And then when Canelo could get that left hook to the body off, which is a really strong, powerful punch, he was able to absorb it. He blocked it. And many people were wondering, even if, could Crawford absorb Canelo's punches? And he did, and he absorbed it. It didn't seem to have any effect. And one of the things about Crawford is that he's very stoic. Matter of fact, Canelo is stoic and Crawford is stoic. So every time Canelo was able to throw the punch to the body, even though it was, say, hitting his arm, it didn't appear to have, you can't say it doesn't have any effect because punches have an effect, but it wasn't having a significant effect. And the other feared weapon in Canelo's arsenal is that right hand. And for a reference point, check out the Amir Khan fight. Now, the best way to avoid a right hand is to avoid a right hand with movement. Now, in fairness to Canelo, he got in range to be able to throw the right hand to the target. But Crawford, even though he got in range to throw the right hand to the target, Crawford always had very good hand positioning, and therefore this dangerous weapon that can have devastating consequences was always being nullified. Now, there was a particular round where Canelo threw the overhand right, or threw the right hook really powerful, and it was caught, and then he changed the trajectory and threw it down the middle, and he had some success there. But primarily the right hand was nullified. And like I said, even if you block a right hand, if you have a significant weight advantage, maybe that can have some type of impact, which can then allow you to get in range and unload other combinations. But the problem was, even though he was getting in range to throw the right hand, it wasn't having a significant impact. And Crawford was still able to utilize the jab and was still able to utilize his movement. So it wasn't causing the distress that it needed to cause to open up other opportunities. And then we had, I believe it was round 9, where Crawford stood in the pocket. He actually engaged in the inside game and he actually got the advantage. He let his hands go, he let combinations go, and he was successful. And I would argue that this was an intelligent risk. It was a risk, but it was an intelligent risk. Let me tell you why. First of all, it got Canelo's respect. And in getting Canelo's respect, I think that this exchange in round 9 kind of deterred Canelo to take further risks. It deterred Canelo to roll the dice and really, really go for it. So I think that decision to stand in the pocket, yes, it was a risk because it increased the opportunity. It created an opportunity for Canelo to land his punches, but Canelo was unable to capitalize, and because he was able to land significantly by standing in the pocket, this reduced the risk of Canelo rolling the dice, which would increase his opportunities to get, some type of significant punch or land a knockout punch, or able to really make a difference with regards to his punch output. And what was interesting was that the major element of this fight was Canelo's strength. That was the main element, but it had no significant impact on the fight. And the other bit where, when we look at what Canelo didn't do, he wasn't able to nullify that jab. That Crawford jab, he just wasn't able to nullify it. He wasn't able to either counter jab it. He wasn't able to time a right hand over it. He wasn't able to nullify the jab, and that was critical. Also, he wasn't able to nullify the movement. So when Crawford would just move side to side, and he wasn't able to nullify that. And crucially, he wasn't able to land the left hook to the body effectively. He wasn't able to land the left hook to the body effectively. And I felt like a Canelo victory, he has to be landing the left hook to the body effectively. And he also wasn't able to land the right hook effectively. What's interesting, when Canelo fought Bivol, he used the jab to the body to set up the right hook to the head. And he didn't do that in this fight. And again, Crawford nullified that. So you got to give Crawford so much credit because his boxing intelligence completely nullified Canelo. And Canelo is known for his awesome counterpunching. But it would appear in this fight that Crawford, or it was evident in this fight that Crawford, his counterpunching was more significant than Canelo's, or his counterpunching was more effective than Canelo's. And he just showed a high boxing intelligence. And he, in my opinion, controlled the pace and controlled the fight. And what I liked in the post-fight was that Terence Crawford showed great respect to Canelo, acknowledging that Canelo was a great champion. He also said, though, that the Canelo's power, he stated that he had been hit harder before. And this is an important point, that different fighters have different ways of training, and certain fighters, they may have a habit of training with heavier sparring partners or sparring partners that hit harder. So even though Canelo's power may have a tremendous impact on another fighter, if you're used to fighting or sparring with, super middleweights, light heavyweights, cruiserweights, etc., then that perceived strength advantage may not be as evident as it looks. And also, there was some evidence that Crawford has been working on, certain MMA things. Like there was some footage online, and that would indicate that, Crawford, people might be underestimating his strength. So sometimes we can assume that, if someone's going up 3 weight divisions, of course you're going to assume that there's a massive power disparity. But in this case, the strength that you would think that Canelo would have on the inside, it wasn't apparent. Now, of course, the fight wasn't predominantly in the pocket. It wasn't predominantly on the inside. But when it was on the inside, like say in round 9, you didn't see that disparity, and it didn't have a positive impact for Canelo. And one may ask the question, what does this defeat mean to Canelo? And does this defeat damage his legacy? Well, I've got a bit of a different take, because I feel that Canelo has cemented himself as being old school, in the sense that he'll fight anyone. And also, let's remind ourselves of an important thing. He gave Crawford the opportunity. He gave Crawford the opportunity to achieve greatness, and Crawford took it. I've said this many times. Every great fighter needs a dancing partner. Every great fighter needs a dancing partner. Imagine Muhammad Ali without Joe Frazier and without that amazing fight against George Foreman. What happens to Evander Holyfield's legacy without the Riddick-Bowe trilogies and the 2 fights with Mike Tyson? And Floyd Mayweather had a great dancing partner with Manny Pacquiao, which set up a major event. It may not have been the greatest fight, but Manny Pacquiao had developed such a well-respected CV and was such a ferocious competitor that everyone wanted to see the fight. And the point being is that Canelo gave that opportunity to Terence Crawford. He gave Terence Crawford the opportunity to achieve the elite level. Now, I believe that Terence Crawford was an elite fighter before this, and I thought the whole thing about who is he fought was, quite frankly, quite ridiculous. But the point is that this was an opportunity to reach true greatness, and Canelo should be respected for giving that opportunity to Terence Crawford, and Terence Crawford should be respected for taking that opportunity with both hands and delivering an absolute masterpiece of a performance. I really want to acknowledge the trainer Bomac in this performance, because I think a lot of times fighters, trainers, they're underlooked. And you could argue that a big part of every victory, or a big part of a boxer's victory, is the quality of their trainer. Think about that. For example, would Lennox Lewis have achieved the same level of greatness without Emmanuel Stewart? Would Vladimir Klitschko have been able to reign so long as heavyweight champion without Emmanuel Stewart? Clearly, Emmanuel Stewart was a massive part of both of those champions. And what would Nassim Hamed's career, who had a great career, he was a champion, and a lot of people really enjoyed Nassim Hamed's power, his speed. But what would his career look like without Brendan Ingle? Brendan Ingle's system created the backbone or the foundation of Nassim Hamed's career. And then you've got other examples. What would Manny Pacquiao's career have looked like without Freddie Roach? So trainers are so important. And one of the reasons why trainers are so important, because trainers, they don't only create strategies. I mean, they do create strategies, but they don't only create strategies, they create environments. Let's say that again. Trainers don't only create strategies, they create environments. So let's give Bomac the credit he deserves, because let's be honest, Crawford needed to be very patient in this fight. Crawford needed to have the right strategy, and he needed to have the right mindset. He needed to be stoic, and he was. He made it look easy, but it wasn't an easy task. And you gotta give credit to Bomac for not only having the right strategy, but creating the right environment for Crawford to compete and excel at this elite level. Now, the one thing that I stated before the fight is that Canelo, he may need to roll the dice. And rolling the dice means going for broke. And in his two losses to Mayweather and in his loss to Bivol, he didn't roll the dice. He didn't go for broke. And one of the things that I thought to myself is that if Bud Crawford is winning the rounds and builds a momentum on the scorecards, will Canelo roll the dice? Will he just, his strength is that he stays composed. That's a strength. He remains stoic. But sometimes you've got to roll the dice. And I thought to myself, if Crawford can get a lead, Canelo's personality, his psychology just doesn't seem to be one where he will just roll that dice. And he didn't. And I think that kind of cost him. Now, remember, if you go for broke, it increases the opportunity to get a knockout, but it also increases the opportunity to get knocked out. But for whatever reason, Canelo didn't roll that dice. And I think that ultimately that was favorable to Crawford, because that enabled him to control the fight, to keep the fight at the distance that he wanted. And Canelo, even though he's an elite level fighter with a high boxing intelligence, he was unable to make the adjustments to create the fight that he wanted. But here's another question. Here's another important question. What is the legacy now of Crawford? What is the legacy now of Crawford? To me, Crawford was already an elite fighter before this fight, but now he's solidified himself as an elite fighter. Think of it. Crawford has become undisputed at lightweight. He's become undisputed at welterweight, and now super middleweight. And I believe that no fighter in the four belt era has achieved that. And additional to this tremendous victory gives him a strong case to be pound for pound number one on the list ahead of Usyk. Of course, that's up for debate, but it definitely gives him a strong case to be number one. And this victory arguably puts him up there as an all-time great. Now, where does he fit on that list? Is he top 30? Is he top 20? Is he top 10? Is he top 5? But I feel he cemented himself on the list as an all-time great. And this does so much for Crawford's legacy. And like I said, you might argue, it wasn't a great fight, but it was a great fight, but not in the brutal sense. It was a great execution of high boxing intelligence. It was a great execution of utilizing the jab, using effective movement, nullifying your opponent's strengths, nullifying the left hook to the body, nullifying the right hook to the head, nullifying the sharp counters. And remember, Canelo is seen not only as an elite level fighter, but an elite level counter puncher. So Canelo's not only just seen as an elite level fighter, he's seen as an elite level counter puncher. And Crawford, in one sense, he made it look comfortable. And that's a byproduct of his greatness, because this was a tremendously difficult task. The internet world and many, many people predicted that Canelo would simply be too strong, He just, they would acknowledge that Bud Crawford was a great fighter, but his greatness and his boxing intelligence and his counter-punching abilities would not be good enough to be able to get him the victory. And he's really just, from a boxing perspective, turned the world upside on his head with this remarkable victory. And from my perspective, I'm so glad that he won. I'm really glad that he won, and I think that I'm also, I like the way he won as well. It was just such a great execution of when you think of the science of boxing, to hit and not be hit, and I think Crawford really illustrated that, and I think it's commendable that in round 9, when he, from my perspective and from many people's perspective, he was clearly winning the fight, he stood in the pocket and, he got his respect. And, yes, he fought a smart fight. And as he said, he didn't want to eat too soon, but he still took some educated risks. And round 9 was an educated risk. And I think to be great, yes, you've got to implement the right strategy, but sometimes you have to take risks, and sometimes you have to take risks. And in round 9, he took that risk. He stood there in the pocket and he got Canelo's respect. And you got to take your hat off to Crawford. You also got to take your hat off to Canelo, because obviously he gave Crawford the opportunity to be great. But you've got to take your hat off to Crawford to be able to show that, he's a legendary fighter and this is his time. And it was just simply an incredible achievement.